The boy was eating dirt when Cal Rennick found him. Not because he wanted to, because there was nothing else left in the world within reach of his small hands. And a body that has gone 4 days without food will try anything that smells faintly of something once alive. Cal reined his bay mare to a stop on the ridge above the wash and watched the small shape down there scraping at the bank with his fingers, and something in his chest that had been quiet for 6 years turned over slow, like a stone in a creek bed being lifted by a current. He was maybe 7, maybe 8. It was hard to tell under the coating of trail dust and the hollow places where his cheeks should have been. He wore a shirt that had once been white and trousers cinched with a length of rope, and his feet were bare and bleeding. And he did not look up when Cal's mare snorted 40 yards behind him. He did not have the strength to look up. Cal Rennick had killed 11 men in his life. He remembered every one of their faces, and none of them had ever done to him what this small, starving boy did in the space of a single breath. He swung down from the saddle. He walked slow, the way a man walks toward a wounded animal that has not yet decided whether to bolt or die. Before we go further tonight, settle in wherever you are. Pour yourself something warm, pull the blanket up, and let us know down in the comments where you're listening from this evening. Whether it's a farmhouse in Iowa, a flat in Manchester, a porch in New South Wales, or a kitchen in Alberta, we love knowing who's with us tonight. Now come back to the wash, because Cal Rennick has just knelt in the dirt beside a boy who has forgotten how to cry. "Son," Cal said. His voice was rougher than he meant it to be. "Son, look at me." The boy turned his head. His eyes were the color of pond ice in February. There was no fear in them. Fear takes energy the boy did not have. He looked at Cal the way a person looks at weather, something happening that could not be argued with. "Where's your people?" Cal asked. The boy's mouth moved. No sound came out. He tried again. "Gone," he said. It was hardly a word. It was the shape of a word made by a throat too dry to finish it. Cal unslung his canteen. He poured a slow measure into his own palm first, testing the temperature against his wrist the way he'd once seen a woman in Missouri test milk for a baby, though he had never spoken to that woman and had watched her only from across the street. He tilted the canteen to the boy's cracked lips. The boy drank. He drank the way a plant drinks after a drought, without any dignity at all, and Cal held the back of his small head with a hand that had drawn a colt faster than most men could think, and he was surprised to find that hand trembling. The wagon was 2 miles east, or what was left of it. Cal walked the boy there in his arms because the boy would not be set down, and Cal did not have it in him to insist. He had seen a fair number of wagons burned in his time. This one had gone quick and hot. The remains of a man lay in the wheel ruts. The remains of a woman lay by what had been the tailgate. Someone had scattered the flour into the dirt for the pleasure of scattering it. Cal read the sign the way another man reads a letter. For horses shod western. One with a chipped left rear. Comanchero, maybe. More likely Bo Yates and his crew, working the freight road out of Adobe Wells and leaving nothing standing. Cal covered the man and the woman with what he could find, and he built 2 stone cairns because that was what a Christian did even when he was not, and the boy washed all of it without speaking. When Cal was done, the boy walked to the smaller cairn and laid a small carved horse on top of it. The horse was cottonwood, whittled poorly, the way a father who was not a whittler might make one for a son on winter nights. The boy stood there a long moment. Then he came back to Cal and took Cal's hand without asking and did not let go. They rode double into evening. Cal had been headed for Fort Sumner with a job waiting and $800 promised. He turned the mare north instead, toward a valley he had not thought of in 6 years, and he did not explain the change to the boy because the boy did not ask. His name was Ely. It came out on the second morning. Over a fire and a can of beans Cal had spooned into him a little at a time, so his shrunken belly would not reject it. Ely Parsons. His pa had been a schoolteacher who thought there was land in Colorado worth risking a family for. His ma had sung hymns even when she was tired. He said all of it the way a boy recites a lesson, and then he did not speak again for 3 days. Cal did not push him. Cal knew about the kind of quiet a person builds when the world has caved in. He had built one himself in 1873, when a woman named Sarah Rennick had died in a bed he had not been beside, because he had been chasing a bounty in New Mexico worth less than her breath had been worth. He had buried Sarah and the child she had been carrying under a cottonwood on land he still owned, but had not walked in 6 years. That was where he was taking the boy. He had not admitted this to himself when he turned the mare, but he admitted it now. riding through the second sunset with a small pair of arms around his ribs. The valley was called Two Doves. It sat at the far northern edge of the Sangre de Cristos, a fold of grass between two red rock walls with a creek running clean through the middle of it. And Cal's cabin still stood at the elbow of the creek because he had built it out of ponderosa and stone and stubbornness. The roof needed mending. The stove was rust. There was a wren's nest inside the coffee pot. Cal set the boy on the porch step and told him to sit, and the boy sat, and Cal got to work. Word travels in country like that. It travels on the wind and on the tongues of neighbors who have not seen a stranger in months. Within a week, Hannah Beecham had ridden down from her homestead on the northern rim with a basket of eggs and a loaf of bread and a look of quiet, careful curiosity that Cal remembered from before Sarah's dying. Hannah was a widow now. Her husband Tom had taken a fever 3 winters back. She had 200 acres of good grazing land and a way of standing on a porch that suggested she had considered leaving many times and chosen not to. She looked at Ely, hollow-cheeked and silent on the porch step. She looked at Cal. She did not ask the question. She said, "There's a schoolhouse in Alder Creek. 12 miles. Miss Cobb teaches through the fall." "He's not ready," Cal said. "No," Hannah agreed. "But he will be." She set the basket down on the porch rail and did not linger. Before she rode out, she crouched to Ely's level and said something so quiet Cal did not catch it. Ely nodded. It was the first movement of his head Cal had seen him make in 6 days that was not eating or sleeping. That night, Cal asked the boy what Hannah had said to him. "She said she lost a boy too," Ely said. "She said it doesn't stop hurting, but you get bigger around it." Cal turned that over for a long time before the fire. He was not a man who had ever known how to say a thing like that. He looked at the small shape of the boy asleep in Sarah's old quilt and understood, in the way a man understands the weather is turning, that his life had changed direction on a ridge above a dry wash, and he was not going back. The trouble came in the 4th month. It came the way trouble always came in that country, riding slow up the creek in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon with the sun behind it, so you couldn't see the faces until they were close enough to matter. There were 4 of them. Cal was splitting wood by the stump. Ely was in the cabin with a book Hannah had brought him, sounding out the words the way a boy sounds out prayers. Cal set them all down and let his right hand fall easy to his side and watched them come. The one in front was a heavy man on a gray gelding with a chipped left rear shoe. Cal had known before the man was within 30 yards. Bo Yates rode with his coat open, showing off a nickeled Remington he had bought in Denver with money that had once belonged to a schoolteacher from Kansas. Behind him rode 3 others, all young, all wearing the kind of faces that men wear when they have not yet met a consequence they could not outrun. "Rennick," Yates called. He grinned. He had lost a front tooth since Cal had last seen him in a saloon in El Paso in the summer of '78. "Heard you were dead." "Heard the same about you," Cal said. "Both of us were lied to." Yates chuckled. He looked past Cal at the cabin. "Word is you got yourself a boy up here." Cal did not answer. "Word is he might be the boy from the freight wagon east of the Cimarron. Which is unfortunate for me, because that boy saw things he shouldn't have." "He didn't see anything," Cal said. "He saw enough. Hand him over. We ride out. Nobody gets hurt today." Cal thought about that. He thought about it the way a man thinks about a river he is about to cross, gauging the current and the bottom and the price of failure. He thought about a small carved cottonwood horse on a cairn of stones. He thought about the way Ely's fingers had closed around his own on a burned patch of road 2 months ago and had not let go since. "You get off my land," Cal said, "and you keep riding, and I'll consider not following you." Yates's grin did not change, but something behind his eyes did. "If you're wondering, right now, what you would have done in Cal's place, a man who spent 20 years running from what he was, standing in front of a cabin with a boy inside who had already lost every person who loved him, I hope you'll tell us in the comments. Because I think this is where a story stops being about the West and starts being about all of us. Now come back to the yard, because Bo Yates has just reached for his Remington. He was fast. He had always been fast. In El Paso in '78, he had put down a ranger named Corcoran with a draw so clean it had made grown men whistle. But Cal Rennick had spent 6 years splitting wood and mending fences and grieving his wife. And grief is a school of its own, and Cal was faster. The Colt came up. The Colt fired once. Yates went sideways off the gray gelding and did not get up. The 3 young riders behind him were already moving. but they were moving the wrong the way men move who have never actually seen a fight, and Cal put the second one down before he had cleared leather. The third dropped his pistol and threw his hands up so high his hat came off. The fourth turned his horse and ran, and Cal let him run, because a witness who runs is a witness who tells the story right, and Cal Rennick was going to need that story told right in Alder Creek before nightfall. The cabin door had opened. Ely stood in it. He had the old scattergun Cal kept above the mantel, and he was holding it wrong, and his face was very white, and Cal walked to him slow and took the gun from his hands and knelt down. "You did right," Cal said. "You stayed inside till it was done. That's what your pa would have wanted." "They killed him," Ely said. "It was not a question." "Yes." "You knew?" "I knew." "Are they going to come back?" "No," Cal said. "Not these ones. And I'm going to make sure the next ones don't either." He rode into Alder Creek that evening with the surviving rider tied to his own saddle and Bo Yates's body across the gray gelding and a boy on the mare behind him with arms locked around his ribs. The sheriff was a man named Otis Kane who had known Cal for 15 years and had thought him dead for 6 of them. Kane looked at the bodies. He looked at the tied rider. He looked at Cal, and then he looked at Ely, and something in his face softened. "That the boy from the Parsons wagon? That's him. You raising him?" "I am." Kane nodded. He nodded the way men nod when a thing has been decided that they were not asked to decide but agree with anyway. "I'll want a statement. Won't be trouble. Yates has been a piece of work for 12 years. Territorial, thank you." "There's more of them," Cal said. "Adobe wells." "There was," Kane said. "Marshals took Adobe wells apart in April. Yates was the last of them running. This closes the book." Cal sat with that a moment. 6 years of running from what he was, and here it was, his gun raised in service of the one thing in his life worth guarding, and the law was thanking him for it. He wondered if Sarah would have laughed. He thought she probably would have. He rode back to Two Doves in the dark. Ely fell asleep against his back. Hannah was waiting on the porch of his cabin with a lantern lit and coffee on the stove she had cleaned. She did not ask what had happened. She had heard the shots from her rim 4 hours earlier and had ridden down and let herself in and waited, because that is what people who have loved and lost do for each other in country like that. She took the sleeping boy from Cal's arms without a word and carried him to the cot she had made up with fresh linen while she waited. When she came back into the main room, Cal was standing by the window, looking at nothing. "I was ready to leave this valley in a box," he said. "I never planned on a boy. I never planned on burying a husband and a son in the same year," Hannah said. "The plans we make aren't the point." She was quiet a while. She poured him coffee. She set it in his hand, and her fingers brushed his and did not withdraw quickly. "Cal," she said, "you've been alone up here a long time." "I have." "So have I." He looked at her then. She was 41 years old. Her hair was going gray at the temples, and she wore it plaited down her back like a girl. She had a small burn scar on her wrist from a stove door that had swung open on her in a bad winter. There was flour on the cuff of her sleeve. He saw all of it at once, the way a man sees a landscape after a long fog. "I'm no bargain, Hannah," he said. "I've done things. Everyone I've ever loved has done things," she said. "Strange how the things you've given up on tend to find you." She smiled at him, small and tired. "Drink your coffee." He drank his coffee. "If this story is finding you tonight, if it's landing somewhere real, then you are exactly who we wrote it for. A quiet like from you, a subscribe if you're new here, tells us these stories matter, and we'll keep telling them for as long as you keep listening." They were married in the spring, in the churchyard at Alder Creek, with Otis Kane standing up for Cal and the widow Trumbull standing up for Hannah, and Ely wearing a suit Hannah had sewn from a bolt of gray wool she had been saving for a purpose she could not previously name. Ely carried the ring on a length of blue ribbon around his neck. He walked between them down the aisle because they had both told him, separately and at different times, that this was a thing they wanted only if he wanted it too. He had said yes to both of them the same way, quiet, certain, with his hand in theirs. The valley combined that summer. Hannah's 200 acres joined Cal's 400. They ran a small herd of Herefords together, and Ely learned to ride a paint pony named Custard, and Hannah taught him his letters at the kitchen table by lamplight, and Cal taught him to shoot a rifle straight, but only at cans, and only after the boy could recite back to him the 4 rules of when a gun was to be drawn, and the one rule that mattered more than the others, which was that it was never drawn out of anger. There were hard days. Ely woke screaming from the wagon 3 or 4 times a month for the first year. and less after that, and then only in the fall when the light through the window matched the light of that afternoon. Cal would go to him each time and sit on the edge of the cot and put a hand on the boy's chest and say nothing, because there was nothing to say, and eventually the boy would sleep again, and Cal would go back to the bed where Hannah was awake and waiting for him, and she would put her hand in his hair and say nothing either, because she had lost a son of her own once, and she knew that grief in a child is not a problem to be solved, but a country to be walked through slowly, holding the child's hand. The boy grew. The boy grew tall. By 14, he was taller than Hannah. By 16, he was as tall as Cal, with the same slow way of moving that suggested a man who had thought about the world before he acted in it. He was quiet like Cal and gentle like Hannah, and he was neither of their blood, and it did not matter to any of the three of them, and it did not matter to anyone in Alder Creek either, because a country like that judged a boy by whether he showed up when a neighbor's barn burned, and Ely Rennick always did. Cal lived to be 71. He died in his own bed on a morning in April, with Hannah's hand in his left hand and Ely's hand. Ely, a grown man of 32 by then, married himself, with 2 daughters of his own, in his right. He said one thing before he went. He looked at Ely and he said, "Boy, you were the best thing I ever did." Ely could not answer him for a long time. When he could, Cal was already gone. But he answered anyway, because his father had taught him that the words you owe a person are owed whether they can hear them or not. "You were the only father I ever had," Ely said, "and you were enough." He buried Cal beside Sarah, under the cottonwood at the elbow of the creek, and he laid the small carved horse from the Cimarron cairn on the stone. The horse was 30 years old by then. The paint had worn off. The whittling was still poor. It looked exactly like what it was, a thing a father had made for a son on winter nights, in a language older than any of them. Hannah lived 9 more years after Cal. She died in the same bed, in the same season, and Ely buried her beside Cal, and he stood at the graves a long time in a spring wind that smelled of grass and pine resin and turned earth. His older daughter, 7 years old and long-legged and named Sarah, came up beside him and slipped her hand into his without asking. His younger daughter, 4 and named Hannah, wrapped her arms around his leg. They stood there together, the 3 of them, the last of a family that had begun when a hungry boy had put his hand into a killer's hand on a burned patch of road and had not let go. The sun was low. The valley was gold with it. Ely lifted his younger girl onto his hip and took his older girl's hand, and they walked back toward the cabin where supper was waiting and a fire was already lit, and behind them the 2 graves lay quiet under the cottonwood, and the creek ran clean the way it had always run, and a wren sang once from somewhere in the willows, and Ely Rennick, who had once eaten dirt because he did not know what else to do, walked home in the last light of a good day, holding his children's hands the way his father had held his. Some men are remembered for how many they killed. His father, Ely thought, would be remembered for the one boy he had saved. And that, in the end, was the only arithmetic that had ever mattered. Next time, we'll tell you the story of a widowed midwife who was called out into a January blizzard to a ranch that everyone in the county was afraid to ride to, and the wounded outlaw she found bleeding in the barn, whose life she saved before she knew his name, and whose name changed everything the moment she learned it. Until then, sleep warm, hold your people close, and we'll see you here again tomorrow night.